Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session, Mr. Danny Dick. Welcome. The floor is yours.
All right. Welcome, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Welcome to the panel on transition to the smart factory. My name is Danny, and I'm your moderator today for this session, and I hope that your week has been as good or probably even better than mine. And of course, you are finishing the 2021 year on a very high note. So thank you, Luchan, and the Industrial IoT organizers for bringing us together. I woke up very excited this morning at 5 a.m. I wanted to call Luchan and all the organizers. Let's get started early because we have so many amazing people in this session. So we have an amazing panelist, and we have you calling from all over the world. And I want to acknowledge the sponsors for this session. So Hive, MQ, Vertex, and Canonical. Thank you so much for sponsoring this session. And as I said, I'm so grateful to you, our international audience. And if we were in person today, this is what I would have liked to do: an elbow, like a high five, or an elbow high five, I guess. Get to know about you a little bit more and do a little bit of chit chat before the session started. But since we are virtual, that's the thing. I can get to virtually a high five with everyone. So can you please take a second to put in the chat where in the world you are joining from? Just type your name and say, hi, greetings from my home, and then put the name of your place. And maybe you can even tell us what's the greeting in your native language if you're calling internationally from. All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So today's session is being recorded, will be available on demand after the event, and look up for the there will be a follow-up email after the event from Luchan and organizers. So look for that later on. So we are going to take live questions. This is a live panel. That's why you are in a live panel, because you can get to interact with our amazing panelists. And this will be in the second half of the panel. But please remember, you need to post your questions in the Q&A session, not in the chat. You can use the chat to at the follow-up, or maybe share a link with someone that is reinforcing one of the talking points of the panelist, or to show your agreement, or just enjoy the interaction with people in the chat. But we are only going to answer the questions that you put in the Q&A. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Our track will run for about 57 minutes, 55 minutes from now on. And we'll have you out of here just on time for the next session. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to our topic of the panel on transitioning to smart factory. So you see, last year it felt as we were circling the wagons, but now this is 2021. This is the year that we are all sick and tired of just waiting and seeing, and we are just all moving forward in spite, or maybe despite, of certainty or of uncertainty. So the paradox is this COVID is actually accelerating the digital transformation trends. Now, when you think about the transition, you can take a revolution or an evolution approach. So you can take a greenfield or a brownfield approach, right? And our panel today will focus more on the brownfield situation, when we cannot shut down the factory for several weeks or for several months to hook up everything to the sensors and then transition to the digital transformation. They're just academic, they're just idealistic. That doesn't happen in our world. It happens in a theoretical world, not in our world, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess. So instead, our focus on the panel will be, how do we keep manufacturing and operations fully running while we are transitioning to the smart factory? And I want to introduce now the panelists. I want to thank them for being the thought leaders in our field. They have dozens of years of experience leading digital transformations at several organizations. So they have behind them the authority given by their experience. And what I'm even more grateful is that they are sharing so openly, so graciously with others what they are learning. You see, there's one thing to know something and to keep for yourself. There's another thing to know something that you share with the others, so that you are not a river, you are not a reservoir that just accumulates. They are a river that lets, what they learn and the lessons they are sharing on to others. And we are so grateful for their heart and for their attitude. So on the panel today, we have Ian, who is the head of marketing at Hive MQ. We have Shri, who is the SVP of digital transformation strategy at Vertex. We have David, who is the product manager at Canonical and Ubuntu. And we have Conrad, who is a VP of Ecosystem and Workforce at Sesame. And I'm your host, Danny Dick. I'm a computer science faculty at University of Colorado in Boulder. I'm the founder and executive director for the Industry University Consortium for advancing the art and the practice for IoT. And our consortium is functioning under the US National Science Foundation. We are working with several universities to help our industry partners to advance the research and development in the field of digital transformation. Let's get started. So my first opening question and opening statement for each of the panelists is I would love for them to tell us, what does a smart factory mean for them and for their clients? And especially, I would love for them to share stories of why their organizations have transitioned to the smart factory. What are some of the unique opportunities for their organization, maybe for the clients that they work with when they transition to the smart digital transformation? All right, so we'll start with Jan.
Great. Well, thank you, Danny, and thank you for the great introduction. And thank you for everyone for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the next, I guess, 55 minutes. So I think so HiveMQ, just a brief introduction of HiveMQ. HiveMQ is a software vendor, and we help actually companies connect different IoT devices to the cloud. We kind of help them move the data from the devices to the cloud and from the cloud back to the devices. And in the factory world, these devices could be different line equipment, different sensors, different PLCs. And we are working with many companies in the manufacturing setting as they start their smart factory journey. And really, I think at the core of what they're trying to do is really improve the efficiency of their factories and their overall operations. And they're doing this because they need to kind of remain competitive. As we all know, the world's become very competitive. It's certainly in the manufacturing sector, it's becoming even more competitive. And so our customers are tending to kind of really look at kind of how do they get the most efficiency out of their operations. Mm-hmm. And where they kind of are kind of the challenge that they have, right, is for doing kind of things like predictive maintenance or kind of any type of machine learning, they need to get the data into one area, one source, right? The traditional brownfield factories kind of have kind of a lot of siloed data. There's a lot of proprietary protocols, proprietary hardware that are attached to proprietary software. And it really makes it hard to have a holistic approach, view of a factory. And certainly if you're looking at doing any type of smart factory across a collection of factories. And we have customers that are definitely doing that. And so the data aggregation is really the key that where they engage with us. And this is where we use a protocol called MQTT to provide a common transport to really bring all the data from the different sources together so people can actually start doing kind of advanced applications to really improve the efficiency. So that's kind of where I see the smart factory is about. It's about improving their efficiency. And to do that, you need to be worried and thinking about the data aggregation.
Right, Tom. Thank you so much, Jan. Let's go next to Conrad, and then to David, and then to Sri, and hear their opinion about how does smart factory look for them, for their clients. Why are people transitioning to the smart factory?
Hi, Danny. Thanks. This is a great time for manufacturing, like you've established. And I'm with SESME, the Smart Manufacturing Institute, and our mission is to accelerate smart manufacturing adoption and to get it out to scale, because all the early adopters have really made strides and have established the best practices. But now, how do we democratize to get it into mass adoption? And I want to add to where Ian was going. Yeah, so data and getting it to a central place so we can do better analytics is a very important part of smart manufacturing, but in a smart factory. But I want to make sure that there's a couple of ingredients we don't forget. That we want that data to be real time, event-driven processes, and that we want to. The reason we're getting it there is not just to put a nice, pretty dashboard up. It's to really have more proactive intelligence that leverages artificial intelligence for prescriptive and assistance to the worker and the supervisor. So I think those are two very important ingredients of smart manufacturing.
Right on. Thank you so much. David and then Sri.
Okay, thank you very much, Danny. I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I think that it is great to share our experience with trying to transform many of the, trying to help the vendors to create devices that are going to transform the factories in the future. You know, Canonical, just a brief introduction of what we do, is a software company. It is a company behind Ubuntu. So we are very, very focused on operating system and generic and open source applications. Okay, so we may have a different angle to the real experience of trying to deploy the things, but we can just show our experience in building the applications and the devices. So our goal is to help enterprises along their way to create devices and applications. Okay, so we have a great variety of customers related to a smart factory as in other different verticals. The focus is very clear. I think that Ian and Conrad have explained very well what's the real purpose behind that transformation. So I think that the real goal behind that is to, okay, we need to try to make a smooth transition so that the return on investment is something clear to the executives that need to take the decisions to make that transition. So for that purpose, we need to help companies and vendors that are going to manufacture the devices to reduce the CapEx and OpEx and try to commodify hardware. Okay, so we have vendors, for instance, that design devices like industrial PCs or PLCs and so on. So these and some of those devices in the past were done were custom devices. So right now they tend to be generic and generic devices. So I think that that's a very good approach and a step forward to try to reduce the CapEx. Okay, so we also have system integrators who are going to, so when trying to reduce this CapEx and trying to commodify the hardware, there are new players getting into action. So we can have system integrators and software developers who can start deploying and developing those applications. And we have many different customers. Okay, so we have Bosch Rexroth, who is the developer of PLCs. We have Siemens, Advantech, or Eurotech creating industrial PCs, which are cross-vertical, but they are very focused on industry automation. And we also have, for instance, robotic vendors like ABB. Okay, so all of them are trying to focus on that. Okay, to try to minimize the capex and try to reduce the friction, so that this smart factory transition can effectively take place.
Right, John. Sri, can you tell us what does a smart factory look like from your organization, and why have your organization transitioned to it, what your clients are doing, and what are some unique opportunities in this area?
Of course. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And Danny, you're a great moderator, and we've seen proof of that in this event as well, as you're establishing this context. So thank you so much for that. Vertex Software is this company that I work for, and we are into democratizing 3D. And I'll explain a little bit about what that is in the context of making this smart factory or digital factory or factory of the future possible, right? So 3D product design has always been the most arguably the most important very visceral representation of the physical product, right? So and that has primarily been within the confines of the engineering teams and within PLM systems, within a very special group of people. And the value of that 3D is going to go 100-fold only if it can be sent upstream to sales and marketing and downstream to manufacturing, downstream to to service and in the field, right? And what Vertex does is make this possible. So we're stitching up the digital thread. Everybody's talked about the digital thread, right? From concept to end of life. And what we are saying is we're going to take this 3D data and make it available for everybody across the value stream. And the best thing is it is done without specialized software, like Ian was talking about, right? No specialized software, no specialized hardware, right? And all you need is a URL, and it is you can see it on a mobile device, on a high-end machine. It doesn't really matter. The same fidelity is delivered to you, right? So what this highlights is all the smart factory initiatives and dreams that people had, right, are now being made possible. All of a sudden, this voluminous information, this 3D data is all of a sudden available to everybody upstream and downstream, whether you're creating a sales quote or whether you're creating work instructions, right? Plus, there are people who are using this 3D data in addition with IoT data coming in from various devices. And on this virtual model, you're able to, connect that IoT data to elements within this virtual model, and that enhances the experience, that enhances decision making, and that enhances the ability for the companies to reduce their non-value added costs in areas that they shouldn't be doing it.
Right on. Right on. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to see that questions are already pouring into the Q&A. So I'm ready to ask one more question, and then we are going to start picking up on some of the questions that come already live on the Q&A. So we are all excited. I'm happy that you gave all these killer applications or transformation examples of smart factories. Let's talk first about the big blocks. Like, we're all excited about the journey, like we want to go to, we know where we want to go, but what are some of the biggest barriers? What are some of the biggest blocks on our way of transitioning to the smart factory, from what you've seen at your organization or the ones that you work with your clients? And this time, let's start with David.
Okay, thank you, Danny. So I think that the biggest barrier must be that most of the executives see these high investments with unclear ROI, with unclear return on investment. So I think it's kind of the wrong mindset, prioritizing these short-term risks and threats against the long-term benefits and value. So I think that we have a kind of a big task to try to evangelize and try to speak about all those benefits so that these barriers go down. Okay, so understanding this value of the transformation is crucial. So as I mentioned earlier, I think that we need to try to make this transition smoother, trying to reduce CapEx, trying to create these software-defined devices, offloading computation to edge and cloud so that the devices are no longer so expensive, and also reduce OpEx, just making devices being more reliable, self-healing, and these kind of things. And I think that also it is really important to try to follow the path of other companies that have already walked that path. Okay, so I think that it is important to ask for help to do the transition of and to ask for help to from well-reputed system integrators and so on.
Right on. So I love that you talk about the mindset. It all starts with the mindset and with accepting that we are going to embark on a transition, and it requires a shift in the way how we as leaders we think. Let's go to Shri. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers, some of the biggest roadblocks?
I think one of the things is that one is, of course, everybody wants to do it, and they don't know how to do it. What is a step one, right? They also think that perhaps they have to boil. I mean, everybody tends to want to boil the ocean, and they're thinking that, okay, if we're going to do that, we don't have the time for that. We need to focus on some production issue that's happening right now, or some parts that need to be shipped to the end customer by the end of the week. I mean, those kind of fires take up a lot of their time. But if people understand that you can do what you want to do with available technologies, with what you have today, right? And different customers, different companies can be at different stages in this journey, and that's fine, right? If you have certain things, you can start with those certain things and then start advancing your adoption of technologies and bringing about change. The other thing is, what I found is a lot of times these discussions remain within the confines of engineering, right? And decisions are made in a silo and not with the entire organization in mind, right? So that is something else that I see. And so what we believe is, whenever you want to start this kind of a journey, you need executive sponsorship, not just in terms of money, but in terms of time and in terms of the importance that the executives allow for this kind of a project, so that everybody understands, all eyes are on this project, right? That's one thing. The second is to make sure that all the different departments, whether it's sales and marketing or engineering and manufacturing and service and everybody else, including safety, right? Everybody needs to be brought in on the same page and say, we're embarking upon this. We see these values. We want your input and we want your commitment to make sure that we drive this together, right? And that's something that doesn't happen. And lastly, people, it's the frog in the well syndrome. You only know your domain and you thinking that's what has to be done. And that is quite challenging. So I think utilizing these kind of forums and understanding what other people have done and understanding the scars, right? What failed is going to be very, very important. Why did a certain experiment fail, right? Does it mean that the entire thing is just a fad, or can we actually do something and learn from that, right? And of course, we can talk about this forever, Danny, but I think I'll stop at that.
I love so much your approach to failure. It's, do we fail forward? We are all going to embark on something new. So by definition, when we try to do something new, we're going to fail. But it's the question not have we failed? Like, we are all going to fail and make errors and mistakes. But what are we learning, right? Are we learning from our own mistakes? And what are we learning from other people's mistakes, from other organizations' mistakes? So it's all about failing forward. You don't fail on your back. You fail. I fail on my face. Somewhere like 2 steps closer to my destination. Oh, I love that approach. Conrad, what do you see as some of the biggest roadblocks?
Well, we see we see a couple of things on the top of every survey we've seen on challenges when manufacturers are asked about the challenges is a lack of talent with the skills required, that's something we're working on a lot here at Sesame. And helping creating education projects that are helping develop new curriculum, that are helping create workforce education programs. And we need, the whole manufacturing USA ecosystem is very dedicated to that. And another one is a lack of interoperable systems. I mean, we must reduce the cost of implementation and integration, make it more plug and play. And that's why in the Sesame ecosystem, we're bringing machine builders, software vendors, and manufacturers together to really work on our problem. And they're all very dedicated to improving that, making it a little easier, reducing costs so we can deploy at scale. If not, we end up with islands of innovation and these little pilots that can't not scale in the enterprise, never mind to the tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers. And Sri mentioned a very important one. You kind of touches something that I'll call culture, because you mentioned staying within these circles of within your corporation, your little cliques, your little different perspectives here. But so organizational culture and opening the culture to more transparency, more collaboration across departments, and even bringing the value chain into looking at them as partners instead of just suppliers that hand you over goods. That's all very important to increasing that level of connectivity and collaboration and orchestration that we want in smart manufacturing. So those are my top three.
I love those. I love those. And that's what I love, because you're doing so many surveys. You are all finding out what are the challenges that dozens and dozens of organizations that you work with have, and you're sharing those with us. So, I think as Shri said, let's learn from someone else's mistakes, before we make our own mistakes. Ian, what are some of the ones that you see? What are some of the ones that
Yeah, to build on what Conrad said and Dave and Shri, so we actually did a survey, HiveMQ did a survey with IIoT World just recently. And we actually asked, what are the top challenges? And the number one challenge was cybersecurity. Number two was data, integration of data. And the third one was lack of skills and knowledge, right? And so I think kind of Conrad absolutely covered off the lack of skills and knowledge. I think cybersecurity is important to everyone, right? And making sure that that's designed into the system is paramount, right? And certainly there's some type of manufacturing facilities are definitely need to be more secure than others, but it's certainly top of mind for everyone. And the integration of the data, I think, is something that really where HiveMQ kind of plays a key role in too, right? Where and it really requires a new approach to designing these systems, right? You really need to rethink their architecture and the infrastructure and how the data moves through these systems. And we like to talk about a kind of implementing a decoupled architecture where each node in the system is independent of each other, right? And so this is a new way of thinking of how the data moves. And that comes back to the lack of skills and knowledge too, right? It kind of, where do you get that knowledge? And I think the good news is that there's kind of organization like SESME, there's other organizations that are really focusing on kind of the education. There's lots of great system integrators out there that are bringing together the core resources, because to do these types of systems, you need hardware expertise, you need networking expertise, you need cloud expertise, you need application expertise, right? And so there's a lot of people that the expertise you need to pull together. And we see like the successful projects, certainly kind of in the smaller customers, bringing in external consultants is certainly a best practice. We've got very large companies that can kind of have the expertise in-house, right? But working with strong industry partners, as David was saying, is certainly important here.
Right on. And I love, Ian, because that transitions us into some of the questions that are already flowing in the Q&A. So Juan is asking about those best practices, and I like how you started threading in some of the best practices. So let's start sharing some on answering to Juan Gomez's question. What are some of the best practices that you have seen in your organization, that you have seen others do? And then Owen next is asking about one of the best practices about starting small, right? How do we start small? Everyone has this idea, let's boil the ocean, right? So let's talk about specifically about what are some of the first steps? How do we start small? But also, because that's one of the best practices, but I would love for you to, each of you, to give us some of the other best practices that you see from your vantage point. So let's go this time and start with Conrad. What are some of the best practices that you have seen from surveys and how you work with organizations?
Well, we've been very focused on this question, and we've established, and you can look in our website for this information, and we got classes on it, but the smart manufacturing first principle. So we truly believe that to switch the way we've been moving from Industry 3 to Industry 4 practices, we need to set some guidelines in place, some bars and goals that we need to establish. And so we have tried to enumerate them. We're teaching them and coaching them. And the idea then is that if you start with smaller projects, that you do it for first, that you have a roadmap. You need to have at least a 3-year roadmap in place with realistic milestones towards achieving your end state. But that when you design your end state, that you consider these first principles in your design. And that will make sure that when these projects all get completed, they're not just created in separate stovepipes, but they all come together into a vision at the end, that you're getting there closer and closer to that end vision. That's very important and very hard with what David mentioned a little bit about that. But if you have that short-term mindset in all your investing, in all your projects, you might not get there. You might achieve little improvements here and there, but to realize a more transformative change, you really need a roadmap with realistic milestones, and you need the principles, kind of the guidelines behind that vision.
Right, Tom. Thanks, Conrad. Let's go to David.
I think that we have mentioned a couple of things that are really interesting. I would like to emphasize this thing that Conrad is mentioning in relation to start small and have a field ahead to start growing and so on, because I think that we need to start with applications that are flexible. Okay, so this is a key point. So it is very important to have a way to produce something which is flexible, modular, and scalable, so that we are not going to get constrained in a short term. Okay, we need to think in a long term, not only in terms of investment, but also in terms of how our factory is going to look like in the next 10, 15 years. Okay, so that's, I think it is a very, very important thing that we are observing in the as best practices in our customers. And I also think that Ian also introduced that security is also a key element. Okay, so that's one of the major concerns from our customers is security, and they are very, very engaged in having all the applications, data, and firmware of the devices and so on very secure. So I think that those are the most important things, along with other things like having low touch elements and so on.
Right on. Thank you. Let's go to Jan.
So I want to introduce a concept of kind of what's called a unified namespace, and this is a concept that's been popularized by a system integrator. His name's Walker Reynolds. And kind of the problem here is that kind of there's all these pairwise integrations between the different components of a system. So the PLC will talk to an HMI, or an HMI will talk to SCADA, right? The SCADA will talk to MES, but the ERP system won't talk directly to the SCADA. They'll have to go through the MES. So there's lots of these pairwise integrations that really kind of the flow of data is kind of almost like a waterfall, right? So kind of we need to kind of rethink about how to do this, right? And Walker, but certainly others people have talked about what the concept of a unified namespace. And at the center of your architecture is this unified namespace. And then all the components of the system become nodes of this architecture. So they're your PLCs, your SCADA, your HMI, your ERP, your MES, all become nodes of the system. And they publish information into the unified namespace. And so when they're kind of creating data, they publish it in. When they want to use data, they pull it out. They subscribe to it from the unified namespace. And that way, what you can do is you're starting to future-proof your architecture in your system, right? So what you can do now is, if you want to add another PLC from a different vendor, right, that PLC can automatically be dropped into this architecture, and it publishes again into unified namespace. You want to add a historian into this. A historian would subscribe to the information that it wants to keep in the historian from the unified namespace. So you're basically breaking apart all these parallels integrations where everyone becomes an independent node of the architecture, and at the center is unified namespace. Where HiveMQ comes in is that kind of to implement a unified namespace is you need kind of a publish subscribe architecture, right, and a broker, and that's where where MQTT and HiveMQ comes in, providing that underlying technology. But I think that's really the key to kind of starting small and growing and kind of future-proofing your investment, is getting the right architecture in place to be able to build upon it.
Right on. Thank you so much for sharing. And let's go to Shri on best practices. What have you seen? You have a lot of experience.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the best practice I have seen is I've also been consulting for and across automotive and transportation or heavy engineering or aerospace or power or medical devices. It doesn't really matter. The one thing that seemed obvious, but not so obvious, is when somebody thinks of a smart factory, they think of one smart factory at one plant, right? You have to think of the whole system, because unless you prep up the data and make sure that the data is available for use by one plant or many plants, right? Then you're either building something only for a unique implementation, or you're doing it for the long term, right? So when I think of smart factory, I think of one thing, for example. By the way, the other thing is 90% of the people out there, you say smart factory, they think, primarily they think IoT, right? Sensors and PLCs. There's so much more to this entire thing than just sensors and PLCs, right? Sensors and PLCs are important because they bring in data, and that data, in addition with other things, makes the story complete, okay? So the first thing is, I'll talk about best practices from a culture standpoint, and then best practices from the actual step one. I think that one of the questions was, how do we start, right? So yep. I'll just take 2 minutes there. One is, a lot of people say, we are fine, we're good enough, we're making 20% EBITDA margins, right? If you have that mentality and without that hunger, you're toast, right? Then there are other people, and I'll include myself into this, right? People like us, very successful, gray hair, no hair, whatever, right? So we come in and say, we've seen it all, and this is the way to go, right? We're not open. I'm saying, again, I'll point my fingers at me, and I'd say, people like us, a lot of times we say, we've seen it all, and I think we need to open our minds and say, perhaps there's a better way, right? Then, of course, I spoke about don't fear failure, right? And it's very, very, very important. You should allow people to say, you failed, don't worry, move on, right? And keep doing it till we get to a point where we are actually succeeding, right? The other thing is looking at the obvious points. I'm sure everybody's heard of Abraham Wald, this mathematician from World War II, and the theory of survivorship bias. So these bombers, I'll just explain it for everybody else, just for the sake of it. It's a very interesting experiment. So when these bombers came back to base, right, everybody looked at where the bullet holes were, right? And then the human tendency is, oh my God, all these bullet holes on this side and that side and the wing and part of the fuselage, let's reinforce them. But reinforcing that, you're only looking at the airplanes that came back. You didn't look at the airplanes that went down, right? So the whole concept of survivorship bias is look at areas that have not been touched, right? And try to address them. A lot of times failure provides us that view of the world, right? And you say, okay, we failed in 15 different places. And so we need to address those things as opposed to try to look at just what's succeeding, right? So a couple of, I guess, historical lessons there. How do you start? Very simple. Start with, again, don't boil the ocean, but start with a simple diagram. Start with what is called as a day in the life of. There's a day in the life of a manufacturing engineer. There's a day in the life of an industrial engineer. There's a day in the life of a salesperson, whatever it is, right? Map that out. Just draw these bubbles and draw lines, and then start to say what data goes from one bubble to the other, right? You're drawing a diagram, and these are small enough for each team, and then bring it all together, and then you'll have a view of the entire enterprise. And the more fidelity you add to that, the better your chances of success. All of a sudden, all these places that are problematic will just jump out, and then you know what to address, and everybody is on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that so much. And getting on the same, there's an excellent question that Leslie Rubin posted on the Q&A. and say we want to bring, going back to how do we bring everyone on the same page? This is the step one, right? And it's all about culture. It's all about, is this the right, all of our attendees today are so excited to say, well, we want to bring digital transformation and smart factory to my organization, but how do I know, and Leslie addressed this, how do I know that we are ready for it? What are some of the signs that the culture in my organization is ready for digital transformation? And Shri, since you had the microphone last time, let's start with you again this time, because this is a follow-up of back to your question that Leslie is asking.
The one thing is, organizations that, inherently, organizations that are hungry, and organizations that are complacent. Mm-hmm. If you see signs of complacence, right? If you see signs of, well, that's a project, and yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it, right? If you hear those kind of comments, the organization is not entirely on board, right? Mm-hmm. And when I say that, I'm talking about in a very generalist sense, right? But you'll start seeing that people are ready when they raise their hand, say that I want to be part of that project. So let us say you came out with a project and you put out your charter and you pitched it attractively to everybody, right? And everybody knows that this is a project up for. If there are enough people volunteering time and effort beyond what they do as their day job, mm-hmm. I think you're there to take the next big step, right? And the other thing is, of course, more mundane and more operational, which is you've been working on 2D all these years. Has there an effort to go to the next step? 3D has been around for 40 years, right? Have you started to work on your designs and on your manufacturing and everything else in 3D? Or are you still making clay models, physical clay models, right? I mean, a lot of people are doing it. A lot of big companies are doing it, right? And it is surprising how backward it is to see all these, this dichotomy, right? I mean, huge amount of technology on one side with smartphones and everything else, and on the other side, we're building clay models. So I think those are some of the indicators of whether a company is ready or not.
Oh, I love that. Let's ask another panelist. So I would like to ask one of the other three panelists, what are some of the signs that you pick on that my organization is ready to embark on the journey? The culture is ready.
So when we look at our customers, the customers that can really get success out of their journey, we really see when they have people from the operational team, people working in the factories, paired with IT people, right? With the people that are kind of working on in the enterprise, and these are certainly for the larger companies, right? Because really, to get to a smart factory, right, it's really bridging those two groups that really leads to success. Because you need to be able to get the data into the enterprise, so the enterprise can use that data and do kind of advanced planning, right, and do things like machine learning. But if the data is not coming out of the factory, if the data is not good quality coming out of the factory, there's this big kind of chasm if you can't get those two teams working together. And we see this over and over again in our customer set, right? If we've got two good champions, right, from the IT and the OT, then the success factors definitely goes up.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Okay, let me ask
Danny,
Conrad. Yeah, sure.
I want to do a follow-up because I'm not sure if I totally agree with how that's being positioned, that question. Is the organization ready? I really think that organizations, if they really feel they're not ready, they really should get ready. So I think we're in really the beginning of a period of prosperity. I mean, yeah, so we've had a tough time and people buckled up to survive it. But the flip side to that is that after this, we're going into a period of prosperity and growth, and companies need to invest, and it's the best time to borrow money. So a lot of people are sitting on reserves and have a capability to borrow, and they need to feel the urgency of getting ready for growth. So I just wanted to put that thought out there, because I really think that companies that are sitting back and saying, I'm okay, and still in survival mode, it might be the time to start switching into a more innovation and growth mode.
Oh, I love that answer, Conrad, because Ross Granby on the Q&A is asking about how do we go over this limited mindset of the financial thing. You know, they see the value of investing, but the concept of investing in systems, they know the value, they know, hypothetically or mentally, ideologically, they believe, they see the advantage of smart manufacturing, but how do we help them go over this hurdle of the financial constraints, you know, and I think what you are telling us is, you know, look beyond that, don't have a limited mindset, think about growth. Let's hear from others. What have you seen successful? How do we help people get over their limited mindset, especially when it comes to finances? Who wants to tackle this first?
Danny, sorry, I had a bit of a glitch here. Can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, so the question is, so we are in an organization, so I'm trying to paraphrase what Ross Grandy has been asking. We are in an organization, they see the benefits of transitioning to a smart manufacturing approach, right? But they have this limited mindset of the finances. They say, oh, this will cost money, this requires a cost, this requires a sacrifice, this requires an investment. How do we help people to get over that limited mindset? They said the money is only so tight right now, because of all the kind of constraints. How do we say them, look, the pie, it's so much more bigger than the slice that you're only seeing right now?
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, a lot of times what happens is people, and again, it's about how you position this, right? It's all about selling. We are all salespeople trying to sell this concept to upper management, if you will, right? Whether it is is a CFO who's worried about how much money is being spent, or the CEO about whether this is going to really take us forward, right? Everybody's looking at numbers. If I give you $2 million, how much incremental increase in profitability will that result at the end, right? Certain things are existential issues, like Conrad was saying. I mean, if you've not started on it, you better get on board right now, kind of a thing, right? Because eventually the people who are not ready will be weaned out of the industry, right? Yeah. You'll have, and I forgive my usage of this most used idiom, right? I mean, you want to have an Apple moment as opposed to a Kodak moment, right?
Yes.
So it's supremely important. Now, how do you do that? It is, so when I and I've advised a lot of these people, and in these boards, and the way you do it is you first understand what the motivating elements are for each of the stakeholders within the boardroom, right? Whether it's a boardroom or whether it's individual leaders, right? Understand what makes them tick, right? Understand what can make them succeed, right? Once you have that, right, your pitch needs to go to each one of them first and say, look, this is the project that we're thinking of, and this is how it's going to affect you, right? And this, so for example, the CFO is only concerned about how much money will be spent and how much money will be, or what kind of ROI will we see, right? So everybody is thinking of ROI, but in different manners, right? From the manufacturing people will look at ROI from a reduction of takt time, for example, right? Or reduction of scrap, right? The ROI for the CFO will be direct money, right? And so on and so forth. So when you look at all these things, make sure that you sell to each one. Don't go with your idea into the boardroom and say, I'm going to present. You just need one person to poo-poo it, and everybody will say, this is not good enough, right? So you want everybody to kind of say that this is a good thing that we are doing for our company. So the only way to do that is one after the other, make sure that everybody else is convinced, then go to the board and present. And once you present, you ask questions like, throw it back at them, right? Saying that, and by the way, by this time, you will have one or two people who will want to champion your project. and you get that executive sponsor, and you're on your way, right? Don't try to do it as a single presentation to a single person, or or a single presentation to the entire board. It'll most probably not succeed.
I love that. And there's a follow-up question from Rose Grandi. He says, this is an interesting one. So are you aware of any suppliers that sort of provide an innovative financial options and say, well, believe in us, you are going to get lots of money, but you're not going to put anything. Like, we as a supplier, we are going to put the money first, we're going to put the seed. Maybe we'll get the cut of the ROI, but trust us, we so much believe in the return that we want to invest our own money and to start the digital transformation. And then, I'll work with you to get a certain percentage. Are you aware of such a model like this exists?
Sure, and if I can take that, since it's a follow-up from the earlier question, right, Danny?
Yes, sure, yeah.
So the concept of shared risk, shared reward is not new. Okay, so this has happened in the past, and this will continue to happen. And a lot of times, this whole concept of something as a service, right? I'll do it. I own the hardware. I own the software. I will keep everything up to date. But you pay only as much as you use or as much as you see value is always there. But in my view, that only solves one part of the problem when it comes to a cash flow conversation, right? The thing is, the investment of time and effort from the customer, right, from these executives, from their teams, is also significant. You cannot do it in a vacuum. You cannot say, I will do everything and you will see value and you just pay me, right? You need their support to make sure that it gets institutionalized at that company, right? Best practices are implemented and people are not cutting corners. They are following newer methodologies to do things, right? Those are the kind of things that will happen. So while in theory, this is, the shared risk, shared reward is good, but it is, these hidden costs or these hidden investments from the customer are going to be very, very important and have to be considered.
So I want to add to Sri, I want to make sure folks, there are methods to fund some of these things is actually through the work that institutes like Sesame are doing. So we co-fund some projects to get companies kickstarted on smart manufacturing. And I want to also let people know that it doesn't need to cost a lot of money to get started, because and there right now there's so many practical solutions to get started. But going back to Sri's point, having a roadmap in place, so you're not just doing a bunch of pilots and little pilots and you don't see the bigger progress, is very important. So you need to at least invest the time and effort. The team needs to be on board with a roadmap and think strategically. And sometimes, they need, and that's not necessarily a cash flow problem. That's a time investment moment. Take the team aside. I don't know, take them out for dinner, pay for pizza, whatever it takes. But you need to have that roadmap in place as a strategic roadmap. And it is possible to break down these projects into smaller chunks and make progress towards a bigger goal. That is definitely practical. And we have plenty of examples of this.
Right, John. Let me ask another question about people from Jose Alves. So he says, what's the best approach to the revolution to Industry 4.0, especially in organization with all the employees? And the reason why I love that question is I would love to hear your thoughts and your experience on things such as that. What are we retraining the senior employees who have been around with us for 20 years? Do we believe that there is no way that you can teach an old dog new tricks? I don't know what's the problem, something like along those. Do we hire new talent, younger people? What have you seen when it comes to workforce and the lack of talent, and especially organizations that have their workforce is more on the senior side? Who would like to start this one first?
I'll kind of kick it off here. So I think that the use of system integrators that are experienced and trained in this area is kind of what I've seen people start with, right? Where they bring in the outside expertise to really start kind of doing things like digital maturity assessments, to start to work with the executive teams on kind of how to start thinking about what's possible, what's feasible, but then also working with the OT and IT people on kind of bringing together the architecture and the vision. Again, it's getting outside help typically accelerates this, right? If you're lucky enough to have the internal skills and expertise, that's awesome. But often people kind of getting external help is what I've seen kind of as the best way to get started.
Right on. I love that answer. So if you don't have all the smarts or all the talent inside, that's why we have the outside world to help us. Like we cannot succeed if you just go on all alone. We want to work with others that complement us. So I'm looking at the time. It's hard for me to stop because we have so much fun and I know we are adding value to people. But in the interest of staying on time and getting people into the next session, I would like to approach the final conclusion, the final key takeaways, and I'm going to ask each of the 4 panelists to tell us what's their give us in a 1 minute, what's your concluding takeaway from the panel today. And let's start with Jan.
Sure. Well, so I think kind of there's been a lot of great points, and I think Sri and Conrad kind of the points of kind of you got to get started now, right? There's no, this isn't optional, quite frankly. To remain competitive in the changing world, you've got to get started now, and getting started can be kind of hard for many organizations, but and there's many ways to work through it. But I think kind of that would be kind of, I think a key thing of this. I do believe it's about the data, right? Kind of you've got to get your equipment connected. I know, like a lot of people I saw in the chat, like kind of a lot of the equipment's not connected. I completely understand that. But you got to get over that. There's lots of new PLCs that are coming out that can kind of accommodate that. But getting connectivity is paramount.
Okay, thank you. Sri, can we get a 30-second one key takeaway, and then we go to David, then we go to Conrad?
Yeah, sure. One thing is like Conrad has said before, all these things are very, very much possible with today's technology, right? You don't need to boil the ocean. Start with small successes and then start building on it. It's very important. The second thing that I mentioned earlier, and somebody posted a question on that as well, is I said there's a lot more than connecting devices, sensors and PLCs and doing all that, because you might have old machines, which again, you're thinking about how much it takes to actually get them up to speed, right? My point is, when you talk about a smart factory, let's take digital work instructions, for example, 3D work instructions, right? Possible today without connecting your devices, right? It is an element of the smart factory or the factory of the future, right? Talking about capturing quality defects on the shop floor with these new age tools and technologies, very much possible without, doing classic IoT, for example, right? So there are tons of things people can do that can take them in these steps going forward. So that's how I'll finish off, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. And oh, by the way, very, very important, and I think you mentioned it, if you don't have the skill sets, go outside, right? And get experts to at least advise you on what we should do.
Thank you so much. On that note, David and Conrad, what's your key takeaway in 30 seconds?
Okay, very briefly, I think that the digital transformation benefits are really clear to everybody. I think like concepts like zero defect production or predictive maintenance are the holy grail to save money and improve productivity and so on. And to get that in a long run, okay, there must be some investments in AML infrastructure, edge computing, these kind of things. So for that, I think that the enterprises need to have clear what's going to be the return of investment. Okay, so they need to have very clear that their investments are going to be low. The capex is going to reduce, and hardware is going to commodify, also OpEx and so on. Okay, so I think that the goal of the industry, that of the vendors that are going to manufacture the devices are going to use strategies to reduce both of them.
Thank you. And Konrad?
And I just want to add that make sure to define your smart manufacturing strategy in business terms, not in technology terms.
Right.
To develop a culture of transparency and collaboration in the organization. And when you set your roadmap, to set realistic milestones in your roadmap, not have unrealistic expectations of how much you can do in each step along the way and how many benefits you're going to get. So patience, realism in the roadmap will be very important.
And on the end note, it was a joy, a pleasure, and an honor to be with you all, to learn from each of you, to be thinking partners together. And I'm looking forward to staying in the same community with you, and see you in the next session. Thanks, everyone.